Amiga hard disks in a sorry state was the topic of our previous episode, an unaffordable dream item to many of us, myself included, which is why I wanted to save them. We burned through a power supply, oops, and we considered how we might make good a discarded drive with no shell. And today our goal is to have 3 good-looking, reliable devices for use in the cave. Hello cave dwellers, welcome to the cave. We've got spray painting, we've got retro or vapor brighting, we've got 3D printing, we've got lots of processes involved today in trying to restore these Amiga hard disks back to their original state or as close as possible, and then add in some modernizations to make them as useful as possible in the modern day. If you haven't already watched episode 1, this is a 2-part series, so today we're going to finish everything up. But in episode 1 you can learn what all of these things are, how they were competing with each other as far back as 1989 in the case of the Commodore A590 over here, and well, just get a feel for the period and what was going on. We've also got a really interesting chat today with a guy called Mike who worked at GVP back in the day, so he's going to give us a little bit of an insight into the company. But first things first, let's start with the Commodore device over here, the A590. How do we get this looking so much more like a final product than the board that it started out with in episode 1? Let's have a look. We'd like to thank PCBWay.com for supporting our episode today. They aren't just about PCBs, but they do a tremendous job of that. They also offer CNC machining, sheet metal fabrication, 3D printing and injection molding. If you're creating, then PCBWay.com can help you bring your project to life. Get an instant quote now over at PCBWay.com, and we thank them for their support. You saw me experimenting with some orange filament last episode, which was me just trying to prove that a 3D printed case was a workable idea for the A590, which of course was missing a case entirely. But I didn't really want a tangoed A590 paired with my Amiga, so we found this. Now this I had to get from America because it wasn't on sale in the UK. It's from printedsolids.com, who very kindly reached out having seen episode 1. This is the nice thing about doing multi-episode series. You put out an episode and then people throw out suggestions which just take you off on a completely different tangent, because I was fully expecting to have to print and spray paint something like the orange case that you saw me printing just then. But then Printed Solid stepped forward and they offered me this. This is, it's called Jessie Premium Beige 500. They also sent a sample of their Tan 64. The clues are in the name. Tan 64, very much, as you can see, like a bread bin C64 color. And the Beige 500 very much aimed at the Amiga 500, although very similar to the C64C, which is pretty much the same color as the Amiga 500, as you can see there. So I thought that would save us a lot of hassle if we could just print the case again in the right color without having to spray paint it. So we gave it a go. And here it is. We need to take it off the build plate now and rip off the support materials. The original file for this 3D print was one whole solid lid, but it was just too large for our 3D printer's build plate, which is why I've had to split it into 2 to make it fit on there. And you can see there's the smaller rear piece on the right hand side. With the support material taken out of the way, we've got a pretty clean finish. That looks nice. There's lots of room in there, ample room for our Zulu SCSI board. It does of course have the telltale signs of a 3D printed case, but that's okay. We're not trying to trick anyone into thinking that this is an original part. We just want it to be passable, usable and safe to use. I did add some stickers though, because stickers make everything better. So I had a hard drive plus sticker to go on the top. Let's put that on there. Get that on nice and straight. Lovely. And then the front badge on the front there, that would have been the same color as the top sticker, but the best I could find was this black embossed Chicken Lips logo. So we'll have to make do with that. And it's not bad. I think it will serve us well as our new A590 case. And I also used that filament to print our Mr. Multi-System cases in each filament. So you can see a really good comparison here. Really nice colors. Again, I'd love to be able to buy that Jessie filament in bulk to be able to knock out lots of these cases, because I'm sure people would like these colors, especially the Amiga 500 color. Not too sold on the C64 brown for a multi-system, but I do like the Amiga 500 color. So I'd love to be able to get hold of a lot more of that filament over here in the UK. So I'm pretty happy with how that turned out, and we will take a closer look at that in just a moment. But before I discovered the Printed Solid products over here, which I'll pop down out the way, I had some kind recommendations from you, the viewers, in terms of spray paint. Now, I've never spray painted a 3D print before, so I was interested just to see how it worked. I went ahead and did it anyway. And you recommended some colours to me. I've got the RAL 1013, so a RAL colour matched 1013 Oyster White colour. And I've got a RAL 1015 Light Ivory colour over here, and just some primer. So here you can see me spray painting. It's heavily edited for your viewing pleasure. I left plenty of time between coats for it to dry. The primer went on first. This is a Genolite branded plastic primer. Went on fine. All of these spray paints have a nice wide spray on there, which makes it nice and easy to spray. Reduces the risk of overspray. It just went on really nicely. Then I went on to spraying, first of all, with the Oyster White. Now, I immediately saw a problem with this, both in the colour and the finish. And I can see the problem with the finish is I noticed that I've accidentally ordered a gloss instead of a matte in this colour. And with gloss, anyone who does lots of painting knows, or even a little bit of painting knows, gloss turns up all of the imperfections. The light just bounces off of everything with that glossy, shiny finish. So when you've got the imperfections of a 3D print, it just highlights all of it. And also on an Amiga 500, you don't have a glossy finish. It's definitely a matte finish, so it wouldn't have looked right. However, I still wanted to see what the colour would look like at the end of it. So I carried on spray painting the small rear piece with this colour. And then I moved on for the main piece to the light ivory matte, hoping that this would be more of a creamy A500 colour with a matte finish. I put that on, and well, it's not an offensive colour. Here it is here. I would describe it as being a lot more yellow than the original Amiga 500. It's not quite right, is it? It's well, if your Amiga 500 needs retro brighting quite severely, then it's probably a really good match. But for my tastes, that is far too yellow. So we didn't get a good match. However, what I did learn in this process was spray painting 3D prints is really easy. It takes to the primer and the paint really well, or at least the paints that I used here. So I would definitely do it again, especially if I can get a better color match. And no doubt, actually, if you did a bit of wet sand in between coats, you could probably get it to fill in all of those little imperfections on the 3D print and get a really nice, smooth, shiny or matte finish, if that's the kind of finish that you want and you put a bit of time into it. So definitely needs a bit more exploring in future. Inside, I gave some of the tarnished metal a bit of a buff up with some silver polish to make that good. Give your A590 a good old rub. That's much more like something I'm happy to let near my Amiga now. Lovely and shiny. Then there's the question of how to mount the Zulu SCSI in place inside, in place of the old hard drive. Well, fear not, there's a 3D print for that too, which aligns with the original hard drive mounting holes. And then the Zulu just snaps into place on top of the mount. It's a bit of a tight fit, but that's good. It's a friction fit. That's what you want. You push it in and it holds itself in place. The mount I fitted into place using M4 sized screws and nuts, so that's not in any danger of falling off. On snaps the Zulu SCSI, and then everything can go back together ready for the new shell. It's looking better already. I've got some self-tapping screws to grip into the 3D printed mounting posts inside the shell. You don't want to apply too much torque to them or you'll risk snapping those posts, like I did on the rear section over here. That post is short from over tightening, so I had to print another one off, and then this is what it looks like. So overall, I'm really quite happy with this. It's a million times better than the thing we started out with. First of all, the color's great. Finish is lovely. Those stickers make it look nice, I think. The obvious thing that you'll see is the join down the side between the front and the back 3D printed part. Now, obviously, if you've got a bigger build plate, you won't see that at all. It won't exist. So you could kind of squeeze them together if you wanted, clamp that in place and glue it together. If you really wanted, I might do that in fact, but it really doesn't bother me too much that you can see the line. You're gonna see the join either way. So it depends how much it bugs you really. So I'll show you the A590 running a little bit later along with the other hard drives. We're going to move on to the GVPs now. And before we do, let's have a chat with Mike from GVP, former employee of GVP, and just hear a couple of war stories from him.
Hi, I'm Mike Thomas. I am a long-term software developer, and at one point or another, I did work for Great Valley Products. I actually also wrote the Amy Express BBS package for the Commodore Amiga. And that's kind of how I kind of got known by GVP. I had some of their products and thought I could improve their hard drive installation software, and that's kind of how it started. When they first came out with their card, their initialization software for the hard drive, kind of like everybody's at the time in the early days, would take, minutes or tens of minutes to initialize the hard drive. And that really stemmed from, of course, the fact that in the old days, ST506 drives required low-level formatting, whereas when we got into the days of SCSI didn't require that. Even though you could do a low-level format, there was no real need to do a low-level format. So basically, I wrote FastPrep. By the way, that was not my name. Again, marketing decided that it needed 3 A's in it. Okay. It was just FastPrep spelled properly. But it would just quickly lay down all the necessary data to structure the partition and make the drive available right away. And so with FastPrep, you actually could have a drive usable in just a few seconds compared to like 10 minutes. It was a small company just outside of Philadelphia, in King of Prussia is where it was. But they were a great bunch of people to work with. It was being so small, the owner. And then there was perks that, because we were a top tier third party developer for Commodore, we did get, equipment before they released. So like I had my hands on the 3000 a good 6 months before it was actually put out in the public, which leads to another little tale of my own stupidity. I borrowed it, took it up to my friend, because I'm from Boston. I went and visited my friend who was going to Northeastern University in Boston, and I brought the 3000 with me. While I was visiting him, fortunately, the 3000 was with me in his apartment. My car was stolen from outside the apartment. Well, you can only imagine my fear went through my head. What if it was in the car? I would have been in so much trouble having lost an A3000. I did write some software, but I also did tech support along with the other tech support people. I didn't get to do hardware, even though I'd like to have done hardware. But, it was when I was young. So just the fact that I was able to write software and work tech support was pretty cool. One of the genius things that our advertisement department decided was that it would look better if we installed the RAM backwards. So the RAM was put chips in instead of chips out because they thought it looked better in the pictures. Well, guess what users didn't do? They didn't read the manual. They said, oh, look, this is how you do it. And they put it in backwards. So for quite a while, we got a lot of people calling and saying, my memory doesn't work. We immediately knew right away. Yeah, we're sorry that the photos were done backwards, and the right information is you're supposed to put the memory with chip out. That was a lot of fun. I mean, one of the things we touted was that our hard drives were faster than even Commodore could pass throughput from the drive to memory. And so one of the things I wrote for demoing this at the shows was I actually took the Laserdisc to Dragon's Lair and scanned every frame and put it on the hard drive and then streamed it off because you got to remember, this is way back before there were things like, MPEG and any of that kind of stuff. So we were just streaming the raw data right off the drive into the video frame buffer and showing, Dragon's Lair on the, A2000. And it was very impressive because it was streaming full frame, One of the engineers did make a big faux pas, designing one of our initial SCSI controllers. So this is a SCSI controller for the A2000, but there's something really, really important missing from the design. Whoops, let me put it on the silk screen side. The engineer forgot to include the ROM. So this card could not boot. In fact, wouldn't really work. Unfortunately, back in those days, making 3 of these cards cost us $5,000. So he lost his job because it was a lot of money back then for forgetting. And I kept one because it was like, this will probably be worth something as far as sentimental years later that, look at this was, and there's no EEPROM. Yeah. Yeah, you guys can actually find me on Delusional's Roundtable on YouTube. We post infrequently, but it's a roundtable of discussion of retro arcade games and crossover to also retro consoles. So we do that. We haven't done it in a little while, but we've definitely been talking about posting another one again soon.
And a big thank you to Mike for taking the time to chat to us. Now, let's see how we got these GVPs looking a lot better than they started out. These hard drives we tested out last time, one of them had a working hard drive in, and it is the one that trolled me with the Hadaway What Is Love tune. Yeah, don't need to hear that ever again in my life. So let's rip out that hard drive and now modernize it with the Zulu SCSI and get them looking nice. In terms of color, well, the HD8 Plus model is clearly in a more original state than the HD Plus, which has yellowed. If I hold a pretty nice looking tank mouse here, that's quite an original color for comparison, you can clearly see the difference. I wanted to clean these up, and I want to try and bring the yellowed one up at least a tone or two, just to make it a touch nicer. Both of these cases have fans fitted, which we won't need with our SCSI solution, and those fans would have been well past their prime anyway, some 30 years later. They don't seem to have been screwed into place though. GVP have favoured glue for this job, and it's doing a very good job of keeping hold. I was a bit worried about taking these out without causing damage to the case, but I soon discovered the light touch wasn't going to cut it. I tried a heat gun, that didn't work either, so I resorted to the Persuader. A hammer and a screwdriver, and that made short work of this. As you can see, they popped out quite quickly, and looking inside, you can see the fan here was mounted on 4 standoffs and just a dollop of glue. The same method worked on the other case. We popped that out. This one was mounted slightly differently, more of a fan on a plate slotted into an aperture and then glued into place there. With the fans and then the all-important switches removed, and we learned how important they are in part 1, it was time for them to take a big bubbly bath. Both cases went into the tub together. There was no room for me, although maybe taking Amiga kit into the bath with me would be an energy efficient way of doing these things in future. Anyway, the brush was effective in getting into all the vents, removing all the dirt that's in there, real vents and fake vents in the case design. And we got all the grime and dirt out there, and I did also gently use the scouring side of a dish sponge on some of the more stubborn stains, very gently though. This all happening in warm water with car shampoo, and then once I was happy they were clean, I rinsed them off in the sink afterwards. And then it was time to try our, well, I wouldn't say tried and tested, but I've used this a few times now. This is our Vapor Bright. People seem to be calling this method Vapor Bright, so I think that term's sticking. Our Vapor Bright method of bringing the colors back up. If you want to see this taken to extremes, because I do this in a plant propagator, it heats itself up in the base, heats up the hydrogen peroxide, and does a nice job of anything that will fit in that box. Well, a YouTuber called Mr. Lurch, who some of you may be familiar with, go and check out his channel. I'll put a link in the video description. He takes this to extremes, and he confesses himself in the video that he's probably spent more money than he really should have or wanted to on this project. He's created a Vapor Bright chamber into which he can get his whole, Amiga 500 size cases in there and everything else. And he's very happy. He also learned not to inhale the fumes when you take the lid off this thing. Do be careful if you're trying this yourself. And as I said, go and check out his video. So we popped into the Vapor Bright chamber, the HD8 Plus and the HD Plus. Even though the 8 Plus hadn't really yellowed, there were signs of just a little bit of yellowing along the sides, and I just wanted to see if I could get that out. There's 12% volume liquid peroxide in the base. I've balanced it on cups. Don't worry, I don't serve drinks in these cups. They remain in the box as stands. I'm not going to retro bright visitors' tongues. And I set all this up on a Friday. I didn't use a UV light. It's just the hydrogen peroxide and the heat. And I left this going for 2 days just to see how we would get on with that. I didn't even change the liquid peroxide in the base, just left it to it for 2 days. So while that's going on, let's mount the Zulu SCSI to the internals. In the first GVP, we used another 3D printed mount, as you saw before, but my M4 screws and bolts were just a tiny bit too wide for the GVP's plate in this instance. So I had to make those a tiny bit wider with the drill here. It's only a small increase, so that will still be fine for mounting vintage hard disks in. Don't worry, we can revert this if we want to. So we'll secure that into place with a screw and a nut, and then we'll pop the Zulu on top. And I think that looks like a pretty good fit. Let's talk about power supplies now. As we discovered in part 1 when we blew a power supply up, If you're going to use vintage spinning hard drives in this thing, you want to use an original power supply or a power supply that's up to the original spec to do the job. But if you're not, if you're going to use something like a Zulu SCSI or a SCSI to SD device that only uses 5 volts, there's a little tip that was recommended to me, and we're going to try it now. If you look at the board here, there are 2 pads. These are labeled CN5 and CN6, and all we've got to do is bridge those 2 pads, and then we can power everything from the Amiga itself. We don't need an external power supply. So I gave that area a bit of a clean, gave it some flux, bridged the points with some solder, and that's done. And then I also did the same on the second GVP board. And I must say a huge thanks to John Pyle, who was the person who emailed in and gave me this tip, having seen episode 1. So thank you so much, John. Then there was a bit more cleaning because I just couldn't help myself, and I was having a lovely day relaxing and cleaning things. And tarnished metal really bugs me, so I wanted to clean that up and get that shiny on this GVP. And then I put it all together, and I took the lighter case out of the Vapor Bright chamber on Monday. So this had 2 days. The little bit of yellowing that was on the side was completely gone, and I think it looked pretty good. So with that lid on, I gave it a treatment of this. It's 303 Aerospace Protectant. I liken it to sun cream for your plastics. It offers a layer of UV protection, brings out the colors nicely. It just sort of looks after your plastics, which is really nice. It only needs to be applied every 5 weeks. Here in the museum, I tend to anti-back anything people can touch between sessions. So we just got to keep it nice and clean and not spread bugs and infections across different machines. And then once a month, I'll use the 303 protectant just to top things up and look after them. We've got skylight blinds in every skylight here to keep as much UV out as possible, but I guess you can never be too careful with these things, so that's what I like to use. And so if we consider what we started out with, this, I think, has come up rather nicely. So that's the HD 8 Plus over here, and then what we did with the HD Plus, we've already soldered across those CN5 and 6 pads to sort out the power supply. It was in the Retro Bright chamber, but I also thought not everybody has access to a 3D printer, so let's try and do this one without using a 3D printer. Let's do it old school, if you like. To mount the Zulu SCSI, I'm just using a sheet of acrylic. So I've scored that, pre-scored in this shot. I've not done it on my lovely wooden table with a Stanley knife, and then I've snapped it there. So we've got our little square. I've already drilled holes in for the mounting points, and then we'll peel off the blue protective coating. Then I can just mount it to these standoffs and mount the Zulu on top. Of course, this doesn't have to be acrylic. It could be plywood. It could be any number of things, really. The risk with acrylic, though, is that you can crack it, which is exactly what I did when I put a standoff in that, well, it was a little bit too large for the hole, snapped off, and it cracked the acrylic here. So just be careful of that. I soldiered on, even with 3 standoffs. It's fine for our needs. It was in there really solidly. Who needs 3D printers? And how did our low effort retro brighting go? Here's a reminder of it before, quite yellow. And here it is after. It's not as bright as the HD8 model, of course, but it has come up a few shades. And when we pair that with the Amiga itself, as you'll see later, it's a pretty close match. It is a nice result. So there we have our 3 Amiga hard drives all working, and I'm sure you'd like to see them in action. So here's a montage. Let's just do that. Here's a montage of them all paired up with the Amiga 500 so you can see how the colors match, how they operate, just what it looks like. Let's just savor a couple of minutes of Amiga in action. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned through doing things well as doing things badly, as I always like to do on this channel. Sometimes it's the not quite right things that teach us the most valuable lessons, like trying the wrong paint color, but learning that actually painting 3D prints works really well. Do continue to have that conversation down in the comment section about your desire to have owned these, as many of you did in episode 1. And again, the stories from those of you who did own them. We've got some comments about some of you spending crazy amounts of money on these back in the day and what you did with them. So do let us know. It's great to see those conversations happening down in the comments. As always, thank you for watching and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.